Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the STAR2C's Roots to Resilience final conference. We are really pleased to have over 150 people with us today from across the 2Cs region and beyond, numbers not just from the Netherlands, Belgium, France, the UK, but also from Germany, Denmark, and Sweden. Very big and warm welcome to everyone. We've got a very full program for everyone over the course of the next 2 hours, where we're going to cover various tools, techniques, case studies, results, outputs, and methodologies on how we can use adaptive planning to implement adaptation pathways. Everything you'll hear today has been developed and designed through the STAR2Cs project, which is one of the projects funded by ERDF through Interreg 2Cs. Over the course of the morning, we'll have a various range of sessions going from presentations to discussion to plenary. Q&As will be taken via Slido, which you'll be able to see the link in the chat of the session, and will either be responded to in the chat during the course of the 2 hours or at the end via the actual discussion points. So without further ado, I'd like to warmly welcome Tony Hills, the Cabinet Member for Environment at Kent County Council, to introduce the session. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you, Christine. Hello, everybody. I'm Tony Hills, Cabinet Member for the Environment at Kent County Council, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you all, our partners from across the project area, from the Netherlands, France, Belgium, and the UK. Kent County Council is the proud leader in the field of climate change adaptation. We have worked in partnership with national and international organisations on this agenda for over 10 years, starting with the 2Cs funded project Coastal Communities 2150 in 2011. The partnership and the result of that work sparked the development of these projects. And we are here today to hear and share the successes of short-term adaptation for long-term resilience to climate change, otherwise known as STAR2Cs. In this opening, I want to highlight the strategic priorities driving adaptation in Kent. Kent County Council is the largest local authority in England, covering 3,500 square kilometres with a population of 1.5 million. The UK Climate Change Act of 2008 required local authorities to act to reduce emissions both from their own operations and geographical area. Legislation has been set to target to net zero carbon emissions by 2050. Kent recognises that our climate is changing and that we have an important role to ensuring effective adaptation across the county. Climate change will result in a growing risk of extreme weather, with the potential of more frequent intense rainfall, floods, droughts, and heat waves. Some of the most significant impacts to Kent and Met, including the loss of reduction of agricultural land, changing of cropping plans, overheating of homes and public buildings, habitat loss, flooding of homes and businesses, disruption to transportation networks. Now that I've sketched out some of the serious concerns, what is Kent doing about it to allow us to adapt and be more resilient? One of the biggest challenges facing any organisation adapting to climate change is making decisions with uncertainty of what will change and by how much and when. As such, Kent County Council has led the development of an adaptation catalyst tool. It helps decision makers to understand what to do, when to do it, how much will it cost, and visualise the pathways. Local government and organisations attending today have a crucial role to play in driving adaptation to climate change. Utilising the tools, methods, and experience of STAR2Cs, we'll find it helpful, including achieving strategic objectives, that's building resilience to climate change through planning processes and strategic and regional objectives, reducing financial costs. Proactive adaptation works are generally cheaper and more effective over time. Meeting statutory requirements. Adaptation is a direct and indirect part of the statutory requirements and embedded in legislation relating to a wide range of environmental issues. Delivering co-benefits Through careful planning, adaptation actions can deliver multiple benefits, reducing emissions and supporting biodiversity. The symposium brings together transnational experts, local authority officers, politicians, community groups, local stakeholders to hear about and discuss the long-term impacts of climate change, the future challenges faced by local authorities in key sectors, approaches and tools to build adaptation capacity, best practice in future-proofing preparedness in response to flooding, drought, heat and severe weather, using adaptation pathways to increase resilience to climate change, and the value of co-creating and partnership working. Outcomes of this session include improved awareness and work of the 2Cs area on climate change, increased participation and uptake of climate resilience and future-proofed actions, new and stronger partnerships with local and international stakeholders. So thank you for giving me this opportunity to speak to you, and I hope you enjoy the conference. Thank you.
Many thanks, Tony, very much for that warm welcome to both the partners in Star2Seas and all our guests on the call today. So getting started then with what is Star2Seas, where did this project come from, and what are you going to hear more about over the course of this session? I'll be introducing what Star2Seas is and why it came to be as project manager of the Star2Seas program. So when it comes to climate change, there is a significant amount of work going on across the globe, particularly in light of things like the climate emergency declaration and movement across the world, but also in the Paris Climate Accord in 2015, looking at what kind of measures could be put in place to limit climate change to 1.5 degrees. It's very important through climate mitigation to look at how we can stop any further climate change. However, given there is already 1.5 degrees in the system, regardless of what we do at this point, there will be some amount of climate change. Adaptation is really the other half of any conversation when it comes to climate and climate risk. What we know is that our climate is already changing. And what you can see on your slide today, it's quite a famous graphic in the bottom left-hand corner, is actually over the last 100 years, we have increasingly seen global temperatures rising. And particularly over the last 10 to 15 years, our hottest years have all occurred during that period. We're already seeing impacts of this change, whether it's climate refugees, people needing to move because of sea level rise or arid conditions. We're seeing changes to severe weather patterns, more frequent severe weather occurring more frequently and in areas that it hadn't been experienced before. So whenever we're dealing with things like net zero and looking at how we're going to cut our emissions, the reason why we need to move towards net zero is because we're trying to avoid an uncertain and potentially very dangerous future. With that uncertain future, there's kind of two sides to this coin. Firstly, it's what is happening today, what is happening in the short term, and that's really around severe weather and its impacts. Just in Kent, we are already experiencing things like flooding more frequently, whether that's through river flooding or sea flooding or surface water flooding. It's occurring more frequently and affecting more of our population, more of our built infrastructure, and more of our houses. We're also experiencing increasing high temperatures, particularly in the summer months, but our winters are also more frequently warmer than they have been in the past. That is having some opportunities and benefits, perhaps for our tourism industry, with more people going and using our beaches and our amenities. It also increases in our growing season. So our agriculture, the Garden of England, has benefits from things like changing temperatures. However, extreme temperatures are really impactful, particularly when it comes to excess deaths in the summer. And we are experiencing that, whether that was through the heat wave in 2003, 2006, or subsequent years. We've had serious heat waves in 2018 and 2019. We've got increasing storms, so storm damage, whether that's increasing wind speeds, again, increasing frequency. In the period of 2013 to 2014, the southern part of England experienced 6 to 7 big storm events over the course of 2 months, which that frequency of storms is very rare, but likely to be increasing as we look to the future. And particularly in Kent, we've got a high water use area. We don't have a lot of rainfall, so we have a deficit with water shortage and water stress. With climate change, we're expecting that to only get worse, particularly as there is more need for water, whether that's through agriculture or growing populations. So our short-term issues are already present, and we've got a wide range of activities, whether it's through the way our emergency services respond to extreme weather events, or how our communities can respond to dealing with the short term. What gets very complicated with adaptation is actually that long term. What happens in 10 years, 20 years, by the end of the century? What is the uncertainties around that? How much will happen? When will it happen? What kind of adaptation do we need to be undertaking to make sure we're prepared? That, again, ties directly into what's happening with mitigation, because if we keep to 1.5 degrees, we have a fairly good understanding in Northern Europe what that will actually mean. There will be risks, there will be impacts, but there will also be opportunities to that. However, if we're looking at a more extreme amount of emissions over the next 10 years or so to 2030, let alone to 2050, if we're looking at that kind of 4-degree temperature rise, the uncertainties around what kind of impacts we'll be facing become very clear. We really just don't know how it will be in the future and when it will be. Which brings us back to actually where Star2Seas has kind of come from, and what the partners in the Star2Seas project started to realize over the last 10 years or so working on adaptation, and particularly in the water realm, is that we're experiencing and facing greater risks and impacts from climate change. But as public authorities or regional authorities, we're having difficulties getting adaptation implemented to actually reduce the vulnerabilities. So we might say we're doing things to be adaptive or resilient, but actually, can we measure? Can we actually define what resilience looks like, and that we know we've implemented and built adaptation capacity? And that's what the project has understood as an implementation gap that it was aiming to address. But why does that implementation gap exist? Well, there's 4 key reasons. And the first one is there's a lack of understanding around future cost savings of adaptation. We know that it's better not to retrofit a built environment or a service or a community in preparation for that change or in response to that change from climate. It's actually better to kind of future-proof our actions and make sure that we are resilient in the way we're designing and planning for that future. That will cost less overall, even if it's a bigger upfront cost, to be able to be resilient to those future changes. Another reason that implementation gap exists is that there weren't or aren't very many relevant tools to be able to integrate adaptation into long-term planning. How do we actually make those long-term future-proof decisions, and what kind of tools are available to understand the uncertainties and be able to work within those uncertainties? That relates quite closely with actually having knowledge and capacity and capability to make those decisions and understand the science, the tools, the uncertainty, have the storytelling or the narrative, have the evidence base to be able to actually understand what kind of changes are available or what kind of opportunities and measures are available within that uncertain future. And then lastly, funding for adaptation has been quite difficult, particularly over the last 5 years. A lot of money has gone into focusing on addressing the net zero targets, how we actually cut emissions. But as I said previously, there is an amount of change already in our system that we will need to become resilient to. So where is that money coming from? And linking into the first point around understanding the future cost savings of adaptation. Adaptation, because climate change is something that's happening in the future, in 5 years, in 20 years, in 100 years, outside perhaps our lifetimes, it's perceived as future or additional or kind of a low priority relative to what we're facing and decision makers are facing today. So what the STAR2Cs partnership really understood is that there's not a clear mechanism for embedding cost-effective adaptation into decision-making, and that formed the core of the project. Which is where we get STAR2Cs. So STAR2Cs, as I said in my introduction, is a Interreg funded project through the 2Cs program, which links partners from the UK, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France to overcome shared challenges. And in this case, the shared challenge is that implementation gap for embedding and delivering adaptation. We've got 8 partners in the project with an overall budget of around 4 million over the course of the last 3.5 years. And this is our final conference where we will be sharing the end results of the project. But before you see the results, we'll talk about a couple of our objectives and what we were trying to achieve. So firstly, we aimed to establish how adaptation could be delivered, integrated into business planning, decision-making processes, business as usual. And there were a couple of things that the partners identified right from the start of the project that needed to be embedded to be able to better deliver adaptive planning. And those were concepts like being able to co-design or co-create adaptation pathways. That actually things needed to be customizable to an individual's situation or an organization's situation or a future change in whether that's funding or political decision-making, which leads us to flexibility. Not only does it need to be relevant to the user, whatever the products or the outcomes of this project would have been or are, it needed to be flexible and then tailorable to non-partners, because we really wanted to look at how the whole of the 2Cs area could be better adapted. Future-proofing was key. We really wanted to look long-term. Yes, that means short-term actions need to be taken, and you'll see how we integrated both short and long-term actions over the course of this session today. Looking at how we do things that have co-benefits or multifunctionality. So can you deliver adaptation in a way that provides green space at the same time, or green space and shading at the same time as perhaps lowering your surface water risk? There are things that we've tried to integrate to make sure that we're looking at the whole of the climate change picture and what the future could be. Incremental and integration are two key things. So doing things over time, but integrating it into the way that business practices work so that it's thought of at the very start, not at the kind of end or when something happens, and really focusing on cost effectiveness. As I said, adaptation has been proven to be cost effective if it's done upfront, or at least considered upfront, and not done retroactively or in response to a severe weather event or a change. So how could we build that cost effectiveness into the work that we were doing? So the project has 3 main objectives. The first objective was to really look at what was available out in the adaptation sector already. So using technical solutions that have been created by specialist organizations or other projects, perhaps other EU-funded projects, for instance, seeing what technical measures already existed for overcoming some of the climate risk challenges. It also looked at kind of the ecological system. So how do we use nature-based solutions and green and blue infrastructure to overcome climate change and adapt? Then we wanted to look at both social and economic solutions to adaptation, focusing quite heavily on things like cost-benefit analysis, stakeholder engagement, and really how you actually kind of define and put values around those in terms of how we actually look to progress climate adaptive planning. The second main objective of the project was to get stakeholders who are involved in the project, in our communities and in our organizations, involved in the process of making the decisions and helping identify both the pathways and the different kind of solutions that we wanted to apply through STAR2Cs. So a major part of the work that we've done is actually working within communities with stakeholders to build their knowledge and capacity so that they can participate in that future-proof decision-making process. And then the last objective of the project was actually to demonstrate the success. So we have 8 pilots. You'll be hearing from all of them over the course of this morning, where we've actually in situ done adaptation and applied what we've learned through those technical solutions, through that stakeholder engagement, to on-the-ground delivery of adaptation. project has developed quite a lot of outputs that we are sharing at the moment on our website and on our different partner organization websites as well. But it's kind of broken into three main areas. So the first one, and again, there'll be a session later on specifically on the tools that are presented or produced by the partnership in the project. But the main thing is tools. So we've developed online systems of tools. We've delivered analog climate models, climate dialogues, ways you can actually interact with an uncertain future, whether that's virtually or kind of hybrid, virtual and in person, with that kind of decision-making process. We've done a lot of mapping, we've done a lot of analysis. So there's a number of different tools that have been developed through the project. We were meant to deliver one, we've delivered about 8, I believe, so far. So we've really expanded on what the original project application was suggesting we needed to deliver. In terms of stakeholder engagement, we've delivered over 100 different pieces of stakeholder engagement, each of which will have products, agendas, methodologies, and reports that explain how good processes are in terms of how you do stakeholder engagement, how you analyze stakeholders, how you actually engage those stakeholders, what kind of things that they want to hear about, and what kind of results you can get from that engagement. And then lastly, as I said, we really wanted to demonstrate, we wanted to put things in place in site so that we can actually show that we have grown and developed adaptation solutions. So what have we then tried to achieve? Well, firstly, through the project, we aimed to achieve a 15% increase in local delivery of adaptation measures, so real implementation on the ground of adaptation. We've aimed to work with over 1,000 stakeholders to co-create these adaptation pathways in 8 of the pilot areas. We've looked to the national adaptation programs, whether that's the UK, the Dutch, the French, or the Belgian or Flemish climate adaptation programs, and looked at how up to 30% more local delivery could be achieved and having that delivery be costed and timed. We've worked with over 24 organizations to be able to integrate and adopt STAR2C solutions, and the end goal of the project is actually to save 15% of costs when it comes to responding and adapting to climate change, particularly to severe weather and flooding. So for my last slide, before you hear all the details from the different partners of the project, really, what is the STAR2C solution and where have we come in a nutshell? Climate change is already happening, and we really do need to understand the risks and the costs to be able to take proactive action. This will help us to reduce the impacts of climate change, increase our resilience, and save us money over time. So hopefully over today's session and in the future on our website, online, and through other dissemination, we hope you'll be able to learn something today, take something away, and actually help us to make the 2Cs region more resilient to climate change. Thank you. So as host, I have the honor to introduce our first partners to speak about their perspectives, particularly on the perspectives of the role of community in co-creation and decision-making. And we're going to be comparing two different experiences. Firstly, we have Rob Heinz from the Janichi Shoy Diveland to be talking about what they've done on their climate dialogue. And then his presentation will be directly followed by Frank van Orst from the Janichi Capella and IJssel, and he'll be talking about their Water Street project. So thank you very much. Over to you, Rob.
Thank you, Christine. First, I would present to you the experience of our climate dialogue. It's impossible to present the whole project because it's a lot, so I took off the headliners today to share with you. We didn't do this great work alone. We did it together with Urban Synergy, with Bright, Sweco, Nederland Schuurmans, De Voorhoede, and the Watersnoodmuseum. The next minutes I will share the results of the climate dialogue, of course, the digital knowledge base, which is another project, and some info about the pilot projects. Before you start, it's good to use 3 targets. We use 3 targets for having a dialogue. You have to inform people, so increase the knowledge level of the citizens, inspire them, increase awareness, and co-create, of course, so working together on all kinds of projects. And of course, you can combine these targets in a dialogue. As a starting point, it's good to know your area. You have to know your history of an area, the current situation, do desk research or stress testing we have in the Netherlands, which will show the weak and the strengths of the area. You can have stakeholder interviews and, of course, street interviews. And also it's good to know your political situation before you start. Location. You need to choose a good location. It will help with sharing and inspire people. For example, we had a climate festival at the soccer club in Bruinisse, or play the climate street game, which I tell later about, with the scout group in Bruinisse. But also you can do an information evening in a bar or in a restaurant, or just go outdoor in the neighborhood where the local problems are, and you can talk to the inhabitants in the street. Later on in this meeting, we talk about tools, but we use tools to start a dialogue. We can use to start a dialogue. In this process, we use the climate game. That's also one of the main outputs of this project. It's a climate street game. It's a game that people can play and learn about climate adaptation in the same time. It's fun to play, and people can design their own streets with more trees or wadis or a green roof, answer some quiz questions, and this way people become more aware of the possibilities. Also, we have a water table, but it's for the little children, but also grown-ups can play with it. But you can put water on the table and then use sponges and blocks to build dikes, etc. Because of COVID, we had to explore the online possibilities. We weren't allowed to meet in big groups anymore, so we thought about let's make a digital version of this climate street game. So there was now a digital version of the climate street game, so people can play it online. And also we had some online workshops and lectures and debates via Teams, for example, and this way kept in contact with our citizens and stakeholders. Another project, a side project, but a very important project, is the digital knowledge base. It's a website. It's now just ready. And on this website, you find all kinds of local information about climate change and adaptation, focused on Schouwen-Duiveland. It's not only technical information. Yes, you'll find a lot of maps on it, but also you can find interviews or videos and tools and links to other websites. And also there's just a simple mail address where people can ask their questions about climate adaptation or other questions related to it. For co-creation, we had a pilot project in the Bruinisse area, in the Oranjendok area. And the Oranjendok area is a sub-area of Bruinisse, and it's chosen as a pilot project because we know from our stress test and the response of the residents that there were water-related problems. So the main goal of the pilot was to improve the layout of this area and to reduce the impact of heavy rainfall. And of course, together with the residents, and we did it by designing a more greener living environment with trees and wadis and less pavements or more grass blocks. And in the end, the people were very happy with the results. The next step and final step in the process we are now taking is going to use the output of the dialogue and into new strategies and decision-making processes, and also share our tools and documents with other organizations. So if you want, you can find all the results on the new start2seas.com website. Thank you for listening.
Hello, my name is Frank van Oorschot, and I am from the municipality of Capelle aan de IJssel. And I would like to talk about the outcomes of our stakeholder analysis and the adaptations catalysts for two stakeholders in particular, the two most important, the inhabitants and the politicians. Why are we in this project? I always say, if you can make it in Capelle aan de IJssel, you can make it anywhere. And I would like to expand on that, because if you use your fantasy and you think of the worst possible place from a water management point of view to have a city, a metropole with millions of people, then you have to take a look at Capelle aan de IJssel and see if we can outdo your worst fantasy. Capelle aan de IJssel is for some part built on what we call heavy water, or peat soil, which is basically a deep swamp. It is also the 5th most densely built city in the Netherlands, with extremely busy ground. If you put something in the ground, you will always find something like a cable, the sewer system, etc. And it has all possible water problems imaginable. Some parts of Capelle aan de IJssel are -6 meters below sea level. There's also a tidal river called the IJssel, hence the name Capelle aan de IJssel. There's a heavy rainfall where the system is not capable of managing so much heavy rainfall, because everything has to be pumped out of the area. And the groundwater level at some places is only 10 centimeters, so that's this much, below the top soil level. So if there's a little bit of rain, you get a flood quite easy. Next, yeah. If you compare it to the last speaker, Schouwen-Duiveland, you see that Schouwen-Duiveland is like a green oasis compared to Capelle aan de IJssel. The only green spot you see here is the Schollebos, and the rest is built almost full. Next slide, please. And we had a few research questions. How do we use the stakeholder analysis tool, and how do we involve them with a little room for co-creation? And you will hear a little more from this from Boris Snauert from East Flanders in a little bit. But our most important stakeholders are the inhabitants, of course. But the problem is, if you give them too much room as a co-creator, you create your own disappointments, because there's very little possible. It will either become far too expensive, a cable can run through where inhabitants wants a tree, all the green in an area can become parking space when given too much room to help to involve the inhabitants. So in the past, our solution to this problem was not to give them any freedom, or not to give them a lot of freedom. And this changed due to this project and due to the stakeholder analysis that we used. Because we gave the inhabitants choices, and we let them choose quite radical things. Like, do you want a traditional parking space, or do you want a parking space with green tiles? Do you want lightweight materials, or want to use sand? Do you want to have a parking place or a wadi? Or do you want to use an innovative technology like buffer blocks to capture the heavy rainfall? And to our great joy, the people from the area, they chose really wisely. And this is a good instrument to gather your thoughts and to improve what is possible, while also having a realistic possibility, and you kind of prevent disappointments from both sides. And you see here an inhabitants, and they could choose between all these measures. Next slide, please. And now our pesky politicians, and I can say it because I am an ex-politician myself. And what would a normal politician choose if you have a 2 million or 2.4 million investment? Of course, they choose the 2 million investment. Even if it's lasts longer, like 24 years instead of 20 years, you would still choose the 2 million investment. So why does the politician make the wrong choice? The answer is he doesn't make the wrong choice. With the information you give him, he makes the right choice. And as a policy expert or as an expert on your field, you haven't explained it well enough. And for this, we used the adaptation catalyst. And we helped this with Deltares. We developed it with Deltares. It's on the website of Deltares. And we used all the knowledge and expertise we had in maintenance and in investments and finance and policy making. And we had a few sessions and we kind of crunched the numbers for a longer period of time. And the results of this was that on 196 million investment for the whole of Capelle aan de IJssel, it saves 48.5 million over a 65-year time span. So if you use lightweight materials and innovative solutions like buffer blocks, lightweight materials, etc., versus traditional solutions, it actually makes a lot of sense to choose the lightweight and more innovative solutions. So looking at the longer term, you get a quite clear picture on why this is a solid decision. It will take you some effort, but we really recommend for you to do it, because it's a good way to help organize your insights into good arguments, to convince the politicians and your management, of course, on what you know in your gut is true. By using the adaptation catalyst, you can explain it a lot better. And it makes far more sense to use lightweight materials, buffer blocks, and it makes far more sense to a politician. And it's my last slide. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rob and Frank. So now what we'd like to do is just ask a couple of questions to both of you to see how your experience with stakeholders have kind of changed, or how you experienced different things over the course of your pilots. So actually the first question I will take is from our audience and on Slido. And Rob, this is specifically for you, but Frank, if you've got any insight afterwards, we'd love to hear from you as well. But Rob, how well did the in-person engagement work in terms of transferring from actually physical, kind of being in the same space, to being online? And did you see any changes in kind of, were people increasingly participating, decreasing in their participation, the changes in the audience, anything like that?
Yeah, it's more difficult to create an online event because you see it now, because normally you have more interaction with the public if you are in a meeting in real time, and also like I said before, you can choose a location where not always people go to for that meeting. They can go to, for example, because in Bruinisse they want to see the football match, but in the same time there was a meeting about climate change. So I'm there, so then I can learn about climate adaptation if I am there. But if you have an online meeting, people have to register, and then less people come to the meeting.
Thank you, Rob. Frank, any thoughts from you on changes in participation in light of COVID?
We actually did the whole participation project before COVID, so we didn't have much of a nuisance. But it's still, for other meetings, it's still a problem to have a good digital meeting. It's different from a physical meeting. We have the tools now. We have the equipment to do it, but it's still it's still different. The participation is less high, the involvement is less high, so it's still a bit of a problem.
Excellent. And this is another question from our audience. Frank, I'll go to you first on it, but then Rob, I'd like to hear from you as well. Is it difficult to maintain community interest and involvement in adaptation from the start to the end of an adaptation project?
I found that we asked the inhabitants to go to a certain number of meetings, and we ask a small group of inhabitants to stay with the project. And that actually worked really well. So the small group of people whose involvement was very high stayed with the whole project. We asked them to stay with the whole project, and they all did. And the inhabitants, they go to a few sessions. You can't really ask more from them. And because it's their own street and because it's their own neighborhood, the involvement is usually quite high. And I think if the farther away you get from the backyard, the NIMBY, the less involved people will be. Because all of our projects are actually in the street where they live, the involvement is really high. So it's not really a big problem.
I agree with you, Frank. Only we had some projects weren't only in one street, so we had different places for a project. And yeah, it depends. Sometimes people are very busy, and sometimes you need to do Facebook announcements and do visit a lot of people, and then 5 people come eventually. So it depends on what day it is. But you have altijd a small amount of people will always come. So yeah.
Like 150 people coming, but it's because of it's their street. And I think if it's a street further, they won't come. That's it's quite simple. Yeah.
Their backyard matters as such. I think.
The backyard.
Yes,
we use it to our advantage, and they get really involved. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, we've got another question from the audience, actually. You both have mentioned politics and political support. So do you think that the politicians take climate change, and particularly adaptation, more seriously now than, say, 10 years ago?
For some parts, yes, and for some part, no. Let's say for rain and floods, it's quite obvious. It rains more often, it rains harder, and you can show it in the statistics that this actually is happening right now. And the same is for water management. So I think most politicians, and I myself was an ex-politician, are really convinced that is a problem. For more long-term things like climate change, and how will it change? Not everybody is as convinced as we want them to be, and it's far harder to explain what will happen in the further future. So, but I think for water, it's quite obvious that the climate is changing, and you can really show it quite easily with statistics that it actually is happening right now.
And Rob, anything to add?
No, I think in Schouwen-Duiveland we had the floods of 1953. There were the terrible floods of 1953. So the political situation is that they don't want that again. So yeah, I think that will help.
And actually, speaking of that, the Netherlands has obviously been a world leader in responding and preparing for flood and water management and flood risk. But with the work that's been done, there's been a heavy expectation that the government will do a lot of that management. How much in the work that you've done is allowing inhabitants or your stakeholders to actually adapt themselves? Rob, can we go to you first on that?
You meant that if at the moment what we can see in what the inhabitants do already or themselves?
What can the inhabitants do to actually adapt to climate change themselves?
Oh, there's a lot of examples, and you can see them on all kinds of websites. But also, we do it as a municipality in all our new projects, like Frank with the water blocks is from the municipality. But yeah, we had you can remove your tiles, green roofs, all kinds of plant a tree. And I think now it's that the last few years people start doing it more and more. So yeah, I believe it will be more in the future.
Frank, your thoughts, given that you did a climate street in basically people's
Yeah, we
backyards
did a
and stuff.
climate street, and we also tried to get the inhabitants more involved. But while raising the street with lightweight materials, we also needed to raise the gardens, because the streets, everything goes down. So also the gardens, they go down. And we said, if you want to redo your garden, take out the stones, put more green in it. If you want a parking space in your garden, use green tiles, etc. And we actually had a competition to make the greenest plan for your own garden. And this also helps to get the inhabitants more involved in and actually do something themselves. So I think that's it raises the awareness of this problem, and it also helps trap more water in the area, and it helps in the long run. So I think yeah, that was a good action to raise the awareness.
Thank you. And we've got one more question that we'll take from the audience. So the question is, how do you prevent community co-creation from becoming top-down, led by consultants, rather than actually bottom-up from the... And Frank, would you like to answer that first?
Yeah, for us it's always difficult because it's so busy. But we at the start of the project, we really didn't give the inhabitants a lot of room. So the consultants still go first, but they have to give options. So they have to give 3 options for everything. And we let the inhabitants choose. And to our surprise and to our relief, they choose quite wisely. So they choose the green solutions over the more traditional solutions. They choose the innovations over the more traditional things. So by having the experts, you kind of narrow it down, but you get left over with the realistic options. And given a proper introduction and giving enough information in front, the inhabitants they really choose wisely. So I think hats off for our citizens.
Yeah, I think we use the contractor to involve them to with the contractor. We do the dialogue, and they make a design, and then people go to discuss about the design and said, "From oh no, I don't want a tree there, and I don't want that," and together you bring up the good plan, and finally the results are then the best. But you don't have to say you don't want to say, "This is the plan, just go with it." It's not a good idea.
Excellent. Well, thank you both very much for the 2 Dutch perspectives on community and stakeholder co-creation. Thank you. We will now move on to the next presentation, and I'd like to introduce Iman Fadeli from the Architect and Urban Planning, an Architect and Urban Planner from the Agency of Urban Planning in the Oise Valley, and she'll be talking about the role of spatial planning and architecture in adaptive planning. Iman, thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Good morning, everyone. I will try here to briefly present our pilot site and especially the solution developed within the framework of this project in partnership with the Start2Seize partners and local partners involved. I would remind that the solutions that I'm going to present today are the result of reflection based on the vulnerability of our territory and on adaptation through architectural and development solution to promote resilience and to face floods. 3 parts will be developed during this period. The first one will focus on some contextual elements of the Oise Valley. In the second part, we will look at the evolution of the flood risk management policy to understand the legislative framework in which we worked. And the last part, we will focus on some solutions developed during this project. So to begin, our study area is located in the south of the Hauts-de-France region, just north of Paris. The Oise Valley, formed by the eponymous river and its plain, represented here in blue on the right map, crosses the territory from northeast to southwest and joins the Seine basin downstream from Paris to Conflans-Sainte-Honorine. The Oise Valley is characterized by a relatively flat and smooth lands and a width that varies throughout its course. This flat topography determines the nature of floods, which is characterized here by a slow rise in water levels during floods. Also, floods are the first natural risk in the Oise Valley. Other types of flooding exist, such as rising water tables in rainwater runoff. Despite the diversity of floods, our analysis focused on vulnerability to flooding from overflowing rivers. Indeed, this risk represents the first natural risk that can impact the issues on Oise Valley, as evidenced by the various floods that have occurred since the 28th century. As shown in this table, several floods have indeed been recorded. The most important were those of 1993 and 1995, and they caused considerable material and human damage. These photos show the extent of the floods that can impact the territory over fairly large areas. In addition, these floods, which are already frequent, are likely become more frequent because of climate change. So to deal with floods, the competent authorities have long relied on management policies based on defense using dikes and protective systems such as embankments to face flooding. Other systems have also been employed, like avoidance constructions, flood zones on natural farmlands and forest, but over time everyone have seen the limits of these two policies, especially on the fragility of containment and their resistance over time, and also on the environmental issues, which recommend preserving nature area by limiting urban extension. So in this perspective, and especially following the 2007 flood directive, the authorities decided to explore new ways of managing flood risk. The National Workshop Territoire en Mutation exposé au risque was one of these experiments, which was able to reintroduce the notion of resilience as a means to face floods. It's in this context that we wished to experiment with the application of this notion through our participation in Start2Seize program. These were structured around three scales to measure the limits and levers of territory's resilience and vulnerability. The first part concerns the building and neighborhood scale. To carry out this analysis, 9 sites were selected on Oise Valley in consultation with local stakeholders. These are spread along the Oise Valley and are characterized by the diversity of vocations and exposure to the risk of flooding. So following a series of workshops and with the help of architect Eric Daniel Lacombe, who is an architect specializing in construction in flood area, we have proposed several architectural and urban solutions to deal with the flooding issue. Here are some examples of solution that I will need to detail here, but I just wanted to come back to the example of the Ecoquartier Saron, where a dialogue with the municipality allowed us to find a solution which consists in moving the perimeter of the project to move to a neighboring site less exposed to the risk. The architect has indeed proposed to preserve the most exposed part as natural flood storage, and to carry out a project into risk with in the public spaces that can absorb overflow water. The solution led the municipality to rethink its urban planning document to review especially the building areas. On this board, I would like to focus on the example of the existing industrial area of Brunouille-Pont-Sainte-Maxence, where the architect tried to find ideas to limit the damage to the storage areas. He proposed in particular a solution based on the land topography and on solidarity between different companies. This third example concerns the train station area, which is an area undergoing urban renewal, where the architects proposed a residential project that takes into account the dynamic of flooding by trying to find a good match to connect also the new project to the city center of Verberie. On this slide, we can see his proposal, which is similar to his Matera project in Romorantin-Lanthenay, which has already proved its worth during the 2016 floods. Aware that the resilience of the large territory cannot be based on the one-off resilience of certain buildings of our neighborhoods, we wished to analyze the vulnerability of the Oise Valley by making an analysis of urban services and their interdependence. So this work constitutes the second part of so we have chosen to study 3 urban networks, road networks, to determine the impacted roads and thus the sectors that can be isolated during floods. This analysis allowed us to identify as well public buildings and sensitive establishments impacted. Electricity network to understand how this network operates and the fragility that can arise during flooding. During this analysis, we noted the complexity of the system and the importance of working together with network managers to promote the resilience of the whole system. And finally, the sanitation network, which also constitute a health issue during floods. The analysis made have enabled us to take stock with some managers on the fragility of the existing equipment and the possibilities of improving them to deal with floods. During this analysis process, several maps were produced and of course shared with local stakeholders. As I cannot detail everything here, I strongly invite you to consult the publication on our website, which are available in French and in English. Finally, the third part focuses on risk culture. We're convinced that knowledge sharing and dialogue can provide collective intelligence and bring out solutions. We have therefore supported our analysis process and studies with a number of workshops and presentation in several events where we tried to share new knowledge and create a dialogue. To go further in this idea, and as part of Status's program, we are developing a WebGIS tool to facilitate access to information, and we're also working to find a solution to improve the risk culture, especially through land art in public spaces, for instance. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Iman. Just a reminder to all those in the audience, we'll be doing a big Q&A session at the end of, or towards the end of the 2 hours. So please keep your questions coming in through Slido if you have any questions for Iman or further questions for Frank and Rob from where we've already heard from. The next session that we have is the role of partnerships in developing river contracts, which is a panel interview session with our 3 Belgian partners. So I would like to introduce to the stage as such, Annelies Hoek, who's a hydrologist from the Flemish Environment Agency. We've got Boris Snot from the province of East Flanders and Micheline Gru from the De Vlaamse Waterweg. So if you'll all join me on stage, please. Right. So, for the first question, our Belgian partners in Star2Seas, Province of East Flanders, VMM, and De Vlaamse Waterweg, have all initiated participation projects in the Dender and the Zwalm river basins. Can you tell us about your intention, what your intention was, and how you've approached that process? Annelies, can I go to you first?
Yes. We had in the Zwalm Valley a very strong story of shared responsibility. To start with, in Belgium, we have what we called a multi-layered flood protection, which means that to be able to solve all the flood risk, we're convinced that we need a combination of protection, prevention, and preparedness measurements. And of course, the water management can't do that alone, and we need to collaborate with spatial planners, local governments, citizens, etc. And that was the first thing. And additionally, we also looked at opportunities, win-win situations, while trying to solve those water problems. Christine also, already mentioned integration before. Well, why not increase the green when you need to rearrange a certain area for flood safety? Or in the Zwalm, there is a serious problem with erosion of the hills, which has, of course, a high interference with pluvial floods. So we had a good look at that too. None of these things are the core business of the water manager. But when you work together in a participation process, you link all the opportunities and you invite the participants to collaborate and to make it a better solution in every way. And yeah, that was our intention.
Boris, could you just say a few things about why it's so valuable to have that participation process when it comes to spatial planning in Flanders?
Well, I think Annelies already mentioned some aspects. I think it's important to start analyzing the problem together with your stakeholders, because in doing this, you can define the challenges, but also think together about the solutions. And thinking about solutions together brings up multifaceted measures that allow you to think outside of the box. And in this way, we also try to understand the perspective of each of the stakeholders and to create co-benefits for each of the stakeholders. And in the long end, we believe, because it's a slower process, but we believe that we come up with stronger measures that gain more support from the different stakeholders in that way.
Excellent. And Micheline, Why do you think it's important for participations to be involved, particularly in the Dender?
In the Dender, we had the problem that we had a lot of problems with licenses, and so we had to have collaboration with the stakeholders. So that they can stand behind the solutions that we propose, and they can work together with us to work out. Because as a water manager, we wanted to optimize the valley, but we were looking also for social support, and therefore we had to question the stakeholders to be able to make supported choices in the Dender Valley.
On that kind of social support, how do you go about kind of reaching consensus, particularly when you have concerns around things like permitting?
Around permitting, well, if we have collaboration with the stakeholders to work out the solutions, they stand behind the total project. So once we ask the licenses, then they don't go in interaction to block our processes.
And Annelies, how did you start to look at reaching consensus?
We really worked together. We what we did was mostly work in workshops where we listened to every partner, and every partner sometimes has his blocks and says, no, this is a no-go for me. But when you keep listening and really listen to what the problem really is, you open the dialogue and you make things possible.
Excellent. And within the Zwalum, within the Dender, specifically within the Dender, there's complex interactions between kind of society, ecology, hydrology, there's interdependencies. How did you manage to achieve kind of getting all those representatives, those stakeholders interested in those sectors to come together as part of forming a river contract? Micheline, can I go to you on that?
Yeah. Well, we did especially with collaboration and co-creation. We were searching step by step to the solution. We saw that the Dender Valley was the problems were complex, and they go beyond water alone. So also living, working was very important, because the Dender is not only a rain river, but it's there is a lot of flooding, but there is also so much more. There is also interaction between the river, the nature, the agriculture, the economic functions, transport, living. So the water challenges for now and also for the future, they cannot be separately seen from the current spatial and social developments in that valley. And that's why we needed the approach by a new methodology based on participation and also research by design, technical support in the backyard, but also the collaboration was very important. So we brought together the people who were having interest in the valley, all kind of sectors, also the municipalities. And we were step by step, we first searched for the ambitions. We searched together which mission we wanted with the project, and that we worked out the 2 goals and ambitions, the added values. And so we, together with them, we formed an ambition document that forms the basis for the further process. And by explicitly naming the ambitions, we also were using them in the rest of the process to work out the different alternatives. So the ambitions are for the people involved making clear which direction we want to go out with the valley. And after we started the ambition note, we took the next step, and so we described the building bricks. These are the measures who are realizing a part of the ambitions. And we worked with steering building bricks together with stakeholders. That these are steering bricks are having impact on the water system. But beside that, we were also dealing with other kind of bricks, the bricks who were bringing added values in that valley, and where we also took away the damage of the flooding. So some of these building bricks can be used in certain parts of the Dender Valley, and others can be used for the total valley. So that's why we had, in fact, a problem solution who is dealing with the problems on specific parts of the valley. So that's why also the people are more involved in the process. And so together with these building bricks and also with the stakeholders, the next step we took is searching for alternatives. And then once we have an alternative, we were making modeling, foreseeing which impact it has, and so we go step by step. Now we ended with a set of alternatives that we afterwards will also do a check on if they are dealing with all the goals we want to have in the Dender Valley, and afterwards we can have one alternative proposed to the Flemish government to make a decision about for working through to the actions. So that's the steps we took, and in all these different steps we involved all the stakeholders. We were thinking together with them, and we were also adjusting the plan according to their inputs. Yeah.
I think Christine is frozen.
Yeah.
Maybe we can tell something more.
Yeah.
Yeah. Maybe I can tell why it was. Yeah. Not everyone was equally enthusiastic about contributing. Sometimes it was tough, and people were reluctant to commit to implementing actions. And yeah, we saw that, for example, in our project of individual protection. Yeah, individuals do not always feel the sense of urgency needed to take action, and yeah, in our project of individual protection, we offered individual households a free analysis of the possible measurements against risk flooding of their own houses. And we send out letters to a lot of people, well, 900 households, of which we know that they have an actual flood risk. And we also gave other opportunities to subscribe. But in the end, we only had 60 households subscribed, and we were a bit disappointed. And the reasons for not being too enthusiastic, we think, are that people are not always completely aware of the risks. And yeah, often they think that the last flood was just a one-timer because the culvert was not well maintained or things like that, and they've got excuses like that. Other reasons that they don't participate too much is that they think the problem will be solved by the government, and yeah, why pay why invest when the government will solve it? And then last but not least, it has been a long time since there was a severe flood in that area. And yeah, people are more willing to take action when the experience is still fresh. So you can inform and sensitize people, but Yeah, of course, that is what we did during our project, but ultimately it's the people themselves who have to take action to protect their homes themselves. Boris, maybe you can add some more?
Well, yes, what you say is completely correct. And you can also transpose this to the level of the politicians of the municipalities. It's not only the individual citizens, but also on the level of the political decision makers. You see this difference. You see this gradient of people who are really have this sense of urgency. And these are typically the municipalities lower in the valley system because they have to deal with the floodings and the runoff from up the hill. And the municipalities who are situated more upwards the hill, there's less a sense of urgency there. And you see this also in the willingness to really engage in making measures to deal with the climate change. So on this level, you see the same pattern surfacing.
And Boris, can you say a few words about how important that kind of voluntary contribution was by the participants? Because there's no legal requirement to have done participation in this way or ownership in this way.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes, can you talk about how you've built ownership of participation in the river contract, given that it was voluntary by your stakeholders?
Yes, I think it goes back to the answer I gave before, because we really invested a lot in awareness raising, but also in coming up with the solutions together. We didn't do a desktop analysis and prescribed the measures in the typical way of spatial planning, but we really went into this effort of elaborate participation process. We invested 1.5 years in coming up with solutions with different stakeholders, with citizens via big events, online events, offline events, design workshops. And that's the way we really worked on this support for the actions that eventually ended in the river contract.
And you, through Start2Seas, evaluated a river contract that you had already established in the Markerbeek. Can you talk through a little bit of your lessons learned from the Markerbeek and how you applied that in the Zwalm?
Yes, we did the same thing indeed a couple of years ago in the Markerbeek Valley, which is just besides the Zwalm River Valley. And I think the main difference there is the focus. In the Markerbeek, we had the ambition to make a vision for the whole valley, but all different aspects, spatial planning, flooding, nature, agriculture. So it was a very large and ambitious vision that we developed. And in the end, we got stuck there because it's very hard to have this vision validated by politicians because there's so many aspects and so many sensitivities. So we took this lesson when we started with the Zwalm project, and we said we will focus really hardly on these flooding risks. And by focusing on these flooding risks, we can, when the occasion rises, look for co-benefits for agriculture, for water quality, for spatial planning. But the main focus is flooding risk management. And that really helped to keep the scope more realistic and to have more support by local politicians for the final plan.
Excellent. And perhaps a question to Annelies first. Boris and Michelin, your thoughts on this would be welcome. How do you think this contract approach to delivering flood risk management helps to actively get to a future that the consensus, the community actually wants, and not just preparing for future extreme weather events?
I think the process was very important, and it was really a co-creation, which means that every partner that was around the table is happy, I guess, with this solution. And when you write that down in a contract, you have a basis to go on with that and to actually implement things on the field.
Hello?
Yeah.
Hello?
Michelin, would you like to add any further thoughts on the value of a contract-based approach?
The contract-based approach is important because then you have an involvement of everyone. They stand behind your plan, and the fact that you worked out that contract together with the stakeholders is also a very important step and process that you run through, because then only they stand completely behind the contract, and they want also to work out the actions that are coming out of the process. That's, I think, a very important step you take for involving the people and let them really work out the actions on the field afterwards.
Excellent. And Boris, can you just give us a few ideas on what the benefits are of actually working bilaterally across different types of organizations to achieve these goals of the river contract?
Yes, for the Zwalm, we work together as the province of East Flanders, spatial planning with the Flemish Environment Agency. And I think this was really a good team because it's a very complex process, requiring different skills from the project team in terms of project management, but also skills and knowledge in spatial planning, but then also a lot of technical expertise in water management and flood risk models. And by doing this as a team with different organizations, we could really present this multidisciplinary set of skills. And an additional benefit was that we were not as colored as a partner, because we also are actors, stakeholders in this process. But by working as a team, we became a little bit more neutral, because we didn't just present our organizations, but we were a project team. And I think that was really a big benefit.
Brilliant. Thank you all very much for that, and working together still across your three organizations on adaptation. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Right, we are then moving on to the last major section before our Q&As of the conference, and that is our rapid demonstration of 5 of the tools that were developed through the Star2Seas project. First up, we'll have Neil de Jong from HHNK showing us their 3DI model, followed by Rob Hines from the Jiminchi Shoy Diveland showing us their interactive climate wall. Then Aaron Mugel from Buffer Blocks showing us the buffer block technology. Boris Snot from province of East Flanders showing us the stakeholder analysis tool. And then finally myself showing us the adaptation catalyst tool. So over to you, Neil.
Yes, thank you, Christine. My name is Neil de Jong, and I work for the Dutch water board HHNK. The water boards are the regional authorities for flood control and water resource management, which means that managing climate risk is and implementing adaptive measures is really at the core of our work. And one of the big challenges that we are dealing with is that rainfall events are occurring at increasing intensity and frequency. While at the same time, there's a pressure from spatial development of the land to deal with these floods. And therefore, in the Star2Seas project, we worked on a water system analysis methodology and a 3DI flood modeling tool to better prepare for future flood scenarios. Next slide, please. Yes, thank you. Okay, so the water system analysis methodology that we developed and used consists out of 5 steps that I will briefly walk you through. As a first step, we had to improve the data of our water system because a model is only as good as the data you put in. So we developed an automated data checker to solve common errors. Yeah, next slide, please. The second step was that we then created a 3DI model from this data, again with an automated model builder. This 3DI model I will demonstrate to you later. This model can be used for interactive sessions with partners or to simulate a series of flood events at once. Then a third step we took was to run numerous tests on the model, which we then discussed with internal stakeholders. And this allowed us to understand the model better and to improve the model. And then we used this model to run 18 different future climate scenarios that varied in the intensity of the rainfall event, the duration, and initial conditions. And then we translated the results of these 18 scenarios into different products, such as this inundation map that shows for specific areas the expected chance of floods to occur. We also translated these inundation or flood maps into damage maps that show the estimated projected damage due to floods up to 2050 in millions of euros. And we also created other products such as vulnerability maps that show the risk of hospitals or major roads from flooding. And then in the fifth step, we discussed these results with internal and external stakeholders to come up with solutions. And we tested these solutions, these measures, in a second model when we compared the results. Next slide, please. And we compared the results to show a cost and benefit analysis. Now our management area is for 90% below sea level and consists out of different polder systems that more or less work independently of each other. And one of the big advantages of this methodology for us was that it's fast and reproducible, which allowed us to run these steps for 57 of our polder systems, and also deliver comparable results that could be congregated for area-wide analysis. Now, I would first like to show you the results of step 2, the 3DI model, and just to give you an impression what it would look like. So we're now looking at the interactive display of a 3DI model, and we're looking at the outdoor polder with part of the city of Alkmaar in it. Now, in the video, we're going to simulate a rainfall event of 80 millimeters in 2 hours, which is a rainfall event that we expect to occur once in 1,000 years only. And when we start the model, in the right bottom corner, you see the amount of minutes that rain is simulated in the model. In the center of the screen, you see the model responding to the rainfall event. And we see these white dots that indicate the waterways and the direction of the water flow. Also in the top, we see, for example, this fan-like symbol turning, which indicates a pumping station. And we see in blue, we see floods occurring on the land surface area. We see on we see some areas next to waterways, which could be the result of water-based channels being too narrow. We also see floods occurring in urban areas where it's more likely that water cannot access the water system, the channels surrounding it. We can then also zoom in and click on specific parts of this model to ask for more information. For example, now we're looking at the discharge over time of this particular pumping station. And as you can imagine, this kind of interactive display really helps us to discuss how a water system works with our partners and to also design possible solutions. The next slide, please. Okay, well, finally, from the congregated results of our whole management areas, we really gained insight that help us develop future flood policies, and that help us to discuss with external stakeholders how we can work together in the light of climate adaptation. And I listed some of our results here, maybe more to make you curious than to really introduce new information for you to understand, because there's a lot more to this. But if I still have time, then one important insight that we have gained is that cost-effective measures that we tested in the water system really only take away a fraction of the total damage, which indicates that polders are not designed for extreme events, and that there will always be some claim on the land area. But in total, we projected 500 million euros of flood risk up to 2050 in our management areas. And we also see that more 50% of that is in urban areas, which only total to 17% of our total surface area. Well, what it means that rainfall claims space on the surface is that we need to look at solutions in public and private space. And particularly for urban areas, we've seen some great solutions that Capella and Schouwen-Duiveland working with that improve the capacity of urban areas to deal with heavy rain events. But in addition to that, we really see the importance of also starting a dialogue between urban and rural areas to see how they can help each other in light of climate change and climate adaptation. And last but not least, even with the measures you take, a significant risk remains, and we also have to communicate about that clearly. Yes, I already talked about this. Yeah, as I mentioned, we have a lot more results that I would like to show you, but I can't right now. For that, I would like to refer you to the Star2Seas website, or you can contact me on my email. Okay, that was it. Thank you.
Thank you, Neil. I'm Rob Heintjes, policymaker of the municipality of Schouwen-Duiveland, and I'm going to present to you something about the climate wall. If we think about tools, most of the time we think about complex programs. So no offense, Neil, but we took another approach on the subject by creating an exhibition as a tool to create awareness. As a starting point, we had a tendering process, and we asked to design a creative, catchy, and interactive exhibition on climate adaptation. It must be especially for kids, but also for all ages. Apply the latest state and methods and techniques to present the content. Use good examples, use good existing examples, and must be a compact exhibition, so it's easy to transport, for example, to England or to France or to Belgium. The winner was the interactive climate wall from Podium. They came up with this idea to create a wall within the front side, the interactive part, and on the back side, an information part. So before we start, we need to have some good examples, so inspiration. There are already lots of examples in the Netherlands or in Europe that proven themselves, like the Water Square, for example, Rotterdam, or a wadi, or green roofs, or a simple rain barrel. The next step was to implement them, the examples, into graphics on the interactive part of the wall. And the last step was, when you touch the wall, they have to do something before. If you touch a cloud, it will start to rain and the animation will start. So because the main goal was to use the exhibition for children, and we didn't want to use boring graphics and technical graphics, we don't want to use that. No. Instead of that, a professional artist was asked to create the drawings, use the existing examples of all kinds of climate adaptation measures, and create drawings of it. And also we took some of the elements of the landscape of the municipality of Schouwen-Duiveland, like the sea and the dunes and the buildings, to create a beautiful environment. The next step was to bring these to life. So storyboards were written and animation were made. For example, you have a simple rain barrel, and You see a guy, he's filling up his water can and watering the flowers. And then the other animation for you see people playing basketball on a basketball field. But oh no, it's starting to rain, and the basketball field is turning into a swimming pool, in a temporary swimming pool. But no problem, let's go play water polo. As you can see, there's some humor in it, and we think that through humor, people, especially younger people, will remember the information better. On the back side of the panel is more serious. Then you find the information about the Start2Seas projects. You find information about projects in Belgium or in France or in the Netherlands. And also you find some information about what people can do themselves in their own backyard, of course. Then it was time to build the wall. We use environmental friendly materials and find a good location. We are lucky to have the Watersnoodmuseum at the municipality of Schouwen-Duiveland, because the Watersnoodmuseum or Fruit Museum has more than 100,000 visitors a year. So last July 2020, the exposition opened, and it is already a great success with many visitors. In the next slide, we will see the end results in a video. Due to COVID, we're not allowed to take live shots, so this is a pre-recorded video. Thank you very much.
Blijdorp laten zien.
Je mag praten.
Yeah, good morning everybody. My name is Aaron Mogul from Bufferblock. I'm co-founder, and I'm going to tell you something about our innovation. It's one of the innovations which has been used in the project Arica Waterweg in Capelle aan de IJssel. And next slide. As Frank already mentioned, Capelle aan de IJssel face some challenges which need to be solved, and especially because there is a lot of high groundwater level because of the low situation of Capelle. It's 6 meters below sea level. It has fast subsiding of soil, so the soil is sinking rapidly, and it's also very densely populated. So they were looking for an innovation which could solve these problems, and then they came across our innovation, which they saw in the campus of the Technical University of Delft. It's called the Green Village, and within the Green Village you have the Waterstraat. And in the Waterstraat, it's an area where all innovations, water innovations, can be tested. And one day, Frank and his colleague went to the Waterstraat to look for different kinds of solutions, and that's where they came across us. Next slide, please. The main benefits which they saw in our product was, of course, the high amount of groundwater storage, because Capelle used to deal with a lot of water problems, urban floodings, because of the heavy rainfall, which happens now more because of climate change. And they also noticed, or they asked us first, how much do the blocks weigh? And I first didn't consider if that would be an important point, but when I calculated it, I came across that it actually, because of the the big holes inside of the concrete blocks, that are actually quite light. So the average weight is around 900 kilos per cube, which is almost the same as lightweight fill materials like BIMS. That's a volcanic stone. So that was a good combination of much high water storage, but also lightweight. It was the perfect combination for Capelle. Also, another good thing is that it's very strong, so you don't have to install it very deep, especially with high groundwater levels. Within after 1 meter, you're already in the groundwater, so it's good that it can be placed directly under the road. And also the flexibility of usage. So it can be, there's just one measurement of block and you can place them loosely against each other and then wrap it around with a geotextile. They're also sustainable. They're made from recycled concrete. And that's even more sustainable than like recycled plastic. It has a long lifespan, so more than 50 years. So it will endure a long time. And if we can go to the next slide. It's also in that sense a very sustainable product. If you compare it to other solutions, there are a solution which is mostly used nowadays is the plastic infiltration crate, which can also store a lot of rainwater. It's the benefit from the buffer blocks against the crates is that you don't need to install them deep. The plastic crates are not strong enough to carry heavy traffic loads, so they need to be placed at least 80 centimeters under the soil. Also, if you look at the carbon footprint, the buffer blocks made of recycled concrete, these modern concretes, they're made recycled, they have a lower CO2 carbon footprint than recycled plastic. So that's also an advantage in terms of sustainability. You can go to the next slide. So here's an example from how it was implemented in the residential area of Capelle aan de IJssel. They were placed underneath the street, and it was quite a puzzle because there were a lot of utility pipes as well in the street. But because we made use of mainly the road areas where the cars drive over and not the pedestrian areas, we could avoid a lot of the cables and pipes which were closely under the surface in the pedestrian lanes. And under the roads, you only have like the big sewer pipes. And so that was a good combination, that to keep the cables free, which are highly placed, and only put them above the sewer pipes. So this was a good combination also, and a good exercise to see how you can combine it with existing utility cables and pipes. You can go to the next slide. And here you see the results of how it was implemented. The contractor was also happy with the product because the contractor was able to quickly place them. It's for them a quite easy product, and what they were especially happy with is that in this residential area they don't have a lot of space for driving with your trucks or storing a lot of equipment. So they were happy that they could directly drive over the blocks to place new parts of the water storage fields. So that was a big advantage for the contractor as well, that it's simple to place and also easy to use. So within 1 week, this street was installed with 50 cube of stormwater storage. And from the heavy rainfalls which have occurred last year, they didn't have any floodings now. So all the water goes through the street gullies and then into the blocks. And the geotextile prevents that soil comes into the open spaces, only water. And then the water, it is drained with DT pipes to the rainwater sewer system or to the open water fields nearby. So yeah, this is a short story of how it was installed and how it's now working. It's also being monitored. We have online sensors which can be looked upon to see how it is working, if they are filling or not. But it now looks still working very good. So we hope that it will stay continuously working very good in the future as well. So thank you for watching, and I will end my presentation here.
Okay, thank you, Arun. I'm Boris Nauwart from the province of East Flanders, and I will talk shortly about our stakeholder analysis tool that we developed as a partnership within Star2Seas. And this is a tool to help you develop a participation plan. because as you know, there's different levels of participation, and from the lowest level in terms of engagement of your stakeholder, of information, to the higher levels of co-creation and co-decision. And the main question when you start a new project is which stakeholders should we involve at what level of participation. So the aim of our tool is to help you as a user to identify a broad range of stakeholders, to assign an appropriate level of participation to all these stakeholders, and to start working out a participation strategy. We're not aiming at providing you a complete overview of all participation methods, because there's plenty of manuals and websites that will help you with that. Okay. The tool is set up as an Excel sheet in which the different tabs will guide you through consecutive steps. So let's dive into the tool. These are the different steps that you will be guided through. The first step is, of course, to think and to define the aim and the scope of your project plan before you start working with the tool. You have to have a clear vision of your aim. And then we will guide you through the different steps. Okay, let's dive into the Excel. So the first tab is, let's zoom in, is you're invited to enter your project title and to define your project objective, and to think about very concrete examples of actions that might be included in your final plan, because this helps really to focus, to identify the stakeholders that are important for your project. So for us, we aimed at reducing flooding risks, and we thought of actions like a new controlled flooding zone. So we had to have the water managers aboard. We thought of individual protection of houses. So we had to focus on citizens as well, and about anti-erosion measures. So farmers were also an important stakeholder for us. So you're invited to list the different stakeholders. Let's zoom in. And then you're challenged to think about a couple of additional questions about your stakeholders in order to broaden your perspective and to think beyond the usual suspects of stakeholders. Once you've got your list of stakeholders, we ask you 5 simple questions to analyze the different stakeholders. The first question is, what are the stakes of this person or organization? Will he or she be affected by your project? And then what is the expertise of this stakeholder? Is it added value for your process, or is it even crucial or formally needed? And the last 2 questions you have to answer is what will be the role of this stakeholder in the implementation of the final plan, and should he or she co-finance the final plan? So when you enter the answers to all of these questions, there are 5 simple questions, and you can answer yes, no, or maybe. For instance, inhabitants with a high risk of flooding in our project had high stakes, which is quite self-explanatory. Their expertise was added value and was even crucial, because they know as no other what the real risks are around their living area. And they also will have a key role in the implementation of the final plan, because they will have to protect their houses. And in the beginning of our project, we didn't yet know whether they should finance the final plan and to what degree. So we said maybe. And based on these answers to these questions, we got a suggested level of participation of co-creation. For inhabitants with a low risk of flooding, on the other hand, we got a suggestion by the tool of the level of advice, which is 1 step lower. And then in the next step, you are invited to think about these suggestions. And you are asked a couple of additional questions, and you can think about these with your project team. And based on your answer, you can bump up or you can bump down the level of participation as you see fit. And then in the final tab, you get a list of all your stakeholders with a suggested and the decided level of participation. And then you can really fill out the different participation methods that you came up with. For instance, an information market, a co-design workshop, and then you can really link the methods to your stakeholders, and this is the start of a more elaborate participation plan. So in this way, you see that in a very simple, straightforward way, we guide you through the different steps of elaborating a participation plan with our tool. Next slide, please. And I think the tool is very simple and straightforward in its use. We've also had this feedback from users, and it really will help you to develop a good participation plan. And the tool comes with a short and brief manual to help you get started. So thank you.
Great. So for our final tool, I would like to demonstrate the Adaptation Catalyst e-tool. So the Adaptation Catalyst really serves to help us overcome some of the main challenges to adaptive planning, particularly understanding what to do, when to do it, how much it's going to cost, and how to get your stakeholders on side as part of that narrative or storytelling. So what is it as a tool? Well, it's a decision support tool designed to aid particularly professionals. However, anyone can actually use it in delivering local adaptation to adapt to climate change. It helps visualize and contextualize adaptive planning and pathways. It provides insights on what kind of actions need to be taken in an incremental or an integrated way, particularly in light of uncertainty. And it really encourages stakeholder participation to be able to input information and instantly see how well those adaptation measures will result in a system being resilient. So what does it actually do? Well, again, insight and visualization is key, but interactivity is as well. So what it allows a user to do is put in what kind of adaptation measures that, for instance, if they're combined with things like asset management, how will those be resilient and how will they kind of cope with climate change over time? It also allows you to test different types of measures or packages of measures and compare different alternatives. It helps us to identify what kind of actions need to be taken today versus which ones need to be taken into the future. And finally, it provides insight on what happens if we don't become resilient after perhaps a severe weather event and not actually integrate and adapt to climate change. In the way it creates these visualizations, it really analyzes the effectiveness of different measures, at what point measures or a situation kind of has tipping points where things need to change because the system either is resilient or it fails. And what's really exciting about the Catalyst is that it's applicable in a really wide range of scenarios. Just in Star2Seas, we've tested it on a number of different climate change impacts, whether that's subsidence or flood risk, both sea flooding and river flooding, drought conditions, increases in rainfall events. We've tested it through all those different climate change effects. It also allows us to look at different types of adaptation, which I'll mention on my next slide. It's applicable across all different sectors. It's not sector specific. It's able to be used at different geographical scales. So again, we've tested it in the project on regional scale all the way to individual sites. So a house or a building, for instance. And then lastly, it's open for different types of data precision. If you know how much something's going to cost or what the exact lifespan is of a measure, you can put that in. Equally, it allows you the flexibility to use scales or to move things around, given that the whole element of climate change that we're dealing with in this project is uncertainty. So I'm going to run a video in a second demonstrating the Catalyst, but there's a couple of things just to be aware of as to how the Catalyst works and some definitions. Firstly is the system, which is actually the climate change scenario and all the different measures you want to be testing for its resilience. The pressure is the climate change effect. So that could again be changes in rainfall or sea level rise or changes in temperature. Coping capacity is how well the system actually currently copes with that change that's coming from climate change. And then there are measures that we can put in, for instance, like building dikes, that allow us to cope with that climate change better. There's also different adaptation measures that you can do to reduce a sensitivity or a vulnerability of a population or your built infrastructure and assets. That could be something like property level protection or raising buildings or community resilience. Lastly, we can try to decrease the pressure itself, which is actually reducing the climate change impact, which could be things like installing water retention areas. Finally, alternatives are different packages and combinations of measures, and each of these will be demonstrated in the 2.5-minute video that we've got on now. So when you enter the catalyst, the first thing you want to do is actually set your scenario. And in this example, we'll look at sea level rise in Margate for 2 meters over the next century. Once you've set your scenario, you're actually going to go into the catalyst, which allows you to see the dashboard. And the dashboard is where you see how well your system is either coping, failing, or what kind of measures you need to add. The first set of measures we need to add are actually what's our system's current capacity. And the area, let's just say, has a 1 meter sea level wall, which has a lifespan to 2050. When we add that in, we can instantly see that at 2050, the system fails. The green bar tells us that at the bottom. That means we need to extend the lifespan, perhaps, of that wall. So let's just say, hypothetically, to around 2080. But we're still seeing that actually there's going to be flood risk in the area and a vulnerable population. So we need to do something else, like dredge the harbor, which will reduce the hazard level and the actual risk. If we pop that in, we instantly see how the scenario and how the situation is reflecting that measure and where, again, the failure is. And we're seeing towards the end of the century, it still fails. There's flooding and vulnerability. So let's do something else like community emergency planning. If we pop that in, what we can instantly see again is there's flood risk, but the population is no longer vulnerable. So let's do something entirely different. Let's put in a big sea wall, 3 meters high, over the next century. One measure, one installation, but it will be at great initial cost. If we pop that in, we can see how that system is now behaving. And we can compare that package of measures to the original over the time. And what we see is actually the large sea level seawall performs better, but costs almost double. What we then can do is we can play around with the actual climate change impact. What happens if it happens slower? What happens if it happens faster? And how does the system behave? What this has now shown us, if it's happening faster than we expect, we actually have to move some of our measures up quite a lot to be able to adjust to it. But even if we move the measures, we're not able to actually be resilient to this pace of change in sea level rise. So why don't we do something like adapt to the seawall, add a lip, make it a little higher. Then we can see we're now resilient, but there's that little bit of time where we actually need to build that sea level wall early, and that allows us the opportunity to make our system both resilient, minimize the risk from flooding, but also maximize the resilience of the population and our assets. That was a very quick whirl through, but there's a lot of different support mechanisms in place. I just wanted to demonstrate what the tool actually does and how it works. But if you contact us at the email address provided, we can give you a full run through and tutorial. There's a really detailed user guide available on the public wiki, but also we have a quick start guide as well that allows you to kind of get into the system fairly easily and just start playing around. So thank you very much. Right, so we have overrun ever so slightly, about 4 or 5 minutes over our schedule. So we have some time now for Q&A. We will allow this to go over about 10 minutes. I know that some of the audience will need to leave, but this is being recorded and all the Q&A will be available afterwards. And anything we don't get in the next 10 minutes or so, we'll provide after the event. So a couple of questions that have come through on Slido. Firstly, Rob, around your climate wall, what are your plans for it next? And is there any way of it being on tour and possibly coming to the UK?
I'm happy with this question. Sure, it was one of the main goals of the project. So it will fit in a shipping container, so it's no problem to ship it to the UK. But at the moment, it's in the Watersnood Museum. But if you want, it's no problem to ship it to another country.
Excellent. Thank you, Rob. Another question, this time to Neil, related to your tool. What will the dialogue be between urban and rural areas when dealing with flood management? So will rural areas that have to be flooded, will rural areas have to be flooded to save urban areas?
So what our results have indicated is that there are certain places in our management areas where the risk and the damage in urban areas is so high that it can be cost beneficial to in addition to measures that you can take in an urban area to transport the water to a rural area where it could cause floods. Of course, the party on the receiving end of that water won't think it's so cost beneficial. So that means that you really have to have a good dialogue between the parties that benefit and the parties that will end up with the cost for it, and that you have to organize that process in a fair way. So I would say, like, what would the dialogue look like? I think it's a fair goal to say that both all the parties should be happy in this arrangement. And that you could think about ways to compensate parties on the receiving end that involve the parties that profit from it. You can also think about involving insurance companies. We probably need a municipality or a partner in that takes care of spatial planning to have an overseeing role, and the water board that can act as a transporter of that water. So a dialogue with different parties aimed at arranging a fair way to reduce overall costs.
Thanks. Frank, this question is to you and about your pilot. How well do you think stakeholders are understanding and being able to shape the trade-offs between different types of climate adaptation?
I think because we do a lot of homework before we engage with the stakeholders, I think they're really quite aware. We give a lot of information, and then we let them choose what they can choose. So I would say they're really informed, and they really make a good informed decision. So I would be quite positive about it. I was pleasantly surprised myself with how well informed our inhabitants are, and how well informed they actually came to the meetings. So yeah, it was quite good.
Thank you, Frank. This question is for Iman. Iman, when it comes to the architecture and the planning process, how would you like to monitor the effectiveness of the spatial planning you're advising? How would you monitor that?
Thank you. Architecture and planning is one way of reducing the vulnerability of buildings to flooding. We can, of course, easily imagine buildings with adequate forms to face floods, but the challenge that we have in the Oise Valley concerns in particular the existing buildings and infrastructures which were built without risk. We are fortunate also to have organizations such as Entente Oiselle and awareness centers that also play a role in territory, both to mitigate risk and to raise awareness among the population. Today, we don't have really an idea how can we measure the ideas we developed in this project. We hope that we can follow our reflection with stakeholders and decision makers in our territory. Yes, we probably can make some measures in evolution of plan and planification documents that we develop in our territory, to see how what we done today will get be here in some years. Yes.
Thank you, Iman. And actually, Annelies, something similar to you. How will you measure the impact and the success of the river contracts over the next few years?
Well, we hope to see the actions on the field. Of course, that will be the big challenge, and that will be how people will see that it works. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, Annelies. a question to me around the adaptation catalyst tool and whether or not it allows for decentralized measures, perhaps in a river catchment, to be included as part of that. I would say absolutely. It just takes probably a little bit of creativity as to how you would use the different types of adaptation analysis. So the reduction of vulnerability or sensitivity, the decreasing of the hazard, or the coping capacity increase, how those actually get put into the system. But yes, it would be able to integrate that decentralized measurements in there. Similarly, we're actually applying the adaptation catalyst to net zero and emission calculations, and that involves quite a lot of kind of decentralized measures and looking at how more strategic work is being done and how that then impacts emissions scenarios. And we're able to do that using the adaptation catalyst, which is quite an exciting, different way of using it that we hadn't actually ever anticipated being able to use an adaptation tool in that mitigation space. Just one last question, and it looks like on the Slido, and it's specifically for Rob. So Rob, with the climate wall, how do different generations engage with it? You mentioned about delivering it for children, for instance, but how do different generations engage with the climate wall and understand climate risk?
It's difficult to say, but we think most of the older school children, elementary school children, understand these problems well. And of course, we think that the most of our children visit the climate wall or the exhibition with their parents or on over a school trip. So,
finding, particularly with the Flood Museum, that the memories of the 1953 floods are very still present and motivate the community.
Yes, in the municipality of Schouwen-Duiveland, there's a lot of yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rob. That covers all of the, oh, actually, sorry, one more question I'll take from the Slido, which is around how these projects will all kind of work together then to measure and seek resilience for adaptation to climate change. So what's the legacy, basically, of the project? And the legacy of the project will be both in its online dissemination and its tools, and through its increased knowledge and capacity of those that have participated in the project. And we're looking at over, I think, 3,000 at the moment that have been involved. The partnership, we hope, will live on even after STAR2Seas, and whatever other iterations in the future, we might be able to either apply for funding or at least continue to build off of the networks and the relationships that have been built on this project. As Tony introduced the session at the start, it's all been building over the last 10 years and can be tied back all the way to the Interreg 4 project, Coastal Communities 2150. So the fact that the partners in the room here, the organizations, have already been working together for 10 years on adaptation and resilience, we only look forward to the next 10 years. So I think on that note, doesn't seem like there's any further questions on Slido. I would just like to thank all of the speakers and the partners, the attendees, the stakeholders, for all of their time and their effort in delivering this project over the last 3.5 years, and for the session today. There's been so much information. We will provide links to the presentations and the recordings and answer any follow-up questions afterwards. But again, just thank you all very much. It's been a great few years and a really successful project.